All right. So Toby Howard is not currently available. We're trying to find him on the phone. I'll do my part of the briefing first. Also, immediately following my briefing, you'll hear from Arif Hussein, the chief economist at the World Food Program, and Maximo Torero, who you just saw, the chief economist for the Food and Agriculture Organization, who will join us virtually to brief on the global report on food crises for 2023. The Secretary General arrived in Nairobi late last night, coming from the Afghanistan meeting in Doha. He spent much of the day at the UN compound in Nairobi, where he met with the senior leadership of the UN in the country, including the Director General of the UN office in Nairobi, Zainab Hawa Bangura, the Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, Andersen, and the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Maimunah Mohd Sharif. He also met with UN staff, including those recently temporarily relocated from Sudan. He thanked the staff for all the work they do on behalf of the world's most vulnerable people. The Secretary General emphasized his solidarity with Kenya, which is suffering from both the impact of climate change and an unfair international financial system. Speaking at a press conference, the Secretary General reiterated the immediate need for aid to be allowed into Sudan with secure and immediate access so that humanitarians can distribute it to people who need it the most. Noting the turmoil and the violence, the Secretary General called for an immediate stop to the fighting. All parties must put the interests of the Sudanese people first. That means peace, prosperity, and a return to civilian rule, he said. In a short while, the Secretary General will meet with President William Ruto of Kenya. And tomorrow, as we've mentioned, the Secretary General will open the biannual meeting of the UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination. The Deputy Secretary General, Aminah Mohammed, is also in Nairobi, chairing the UN Sustainable Development Group's annual session. Discussions focused on how to boost our country team's ambition and support countries' transitions in key areas such as energy, climate, food systems, education, jobs, and social protection. UN leaders agreed that this joint effort must be topped by funding for the Sustainable Development Goals ahead of the SDG summit in September, with Ms. Mohammed stressing that the summit will be a key moment to encourage ambition for more impact, with 7 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths visited Port Sudan today to reaffirm our commitment to address the humanitarian needs of the Sudanese people. While in Port Sudan, Mr. Griffiths and Volker, the special representative for the Secretary General in Sudan, had calls with Generals Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, and with civil society leaders. Mr. Griffiths stressed that humanitarian aid must reach all people in need, but that we need strong guarantees on the safety and security of aid workers and supplies. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization tells us that 80 metric tons of emergency medical supplies are awaiting customs clearance in Port Sudan. This includes nearly 60 metric tons of IV fluids, 8 metric tons of trauma kits, and more than 12 metric tons of kits to treat severe acute malnutrition. Expedited customs clearance has been negotiated to ensure the quick release of these supplies. In the coming days, the World Food Program plans to provide food assistance for 384,000 people who are already refugees, newly displaced people, and host communities in the states of Gadaref, Gezira, Kassala, and White Nile. In Port Sudan, WFP has at least 8,000 metric tons of food ready to dispatch as soon as possible. Before the fighting broke out, the agency had more than 80,000 metric tons of food in Sudan. Nearly 17,000 metric tons have been looted. WFP is still trying to establish what quantities remain. Speaking at the high-level open debate of the Security Council on future-proofing trust for sustaining peace, Volker Turk, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, said that history offers us a warning, but also a way forward. The UN Charter aimed to future-proof the world against repetition of the devastating wars, global recession, and imperialism that had preceded it, he said. He added that full compliance with human rights is the best antidote to the inequalities, unaddressed grievances, and exclusion, which are often at the root of instability and conflict. As the UN prepares for the Summit of the Future, including a new agenda for peace, Mr. Turk said he hopes the Council and all member states will make effective use of the trust-building potential of human rights in addressing peace and security concerns. In conclusion of his two-day visit to Sana'a, Yemen, The special envoy to the country, Hans Gronberg, said that he had positive engagements with the de facto authorities. He underscored that any agreement needs to deliver tangible benefits for all Yemenis. The special envoy's next stop is Aden, where he will engage with the government of Yemen and hear their views on the way forward. He will also discuss the way forward with Saudi and Omani officials. Mr. Gronberg added that after a year of unprecedented calm in Yemen, the parties need to take the next bold steps towards ending the conflict. The special envoy on Myanmar, Noelane Hazer, made her first visit to Beijing this week on the 1st and 2nd of May. During the visit, Special Envoy Hazer held discussions with the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Qin Gang, and the Special Envoy for Asian Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Deng Shichun. Ms. Hazer stressed that a robust international response to the ongoing crisis in Myanmar requires a unified regional effort involving neighboring countries that can leverage influence towards the cessation of violence, civilian protection, and stability in Myanmar. In line with the Security Council Resolution 2669 on Myanmar, the Special Envoy continues to closely cooperate with the ASEAN Special Envoy to seek a peaceful and inclusive process towards de-escalating the violence and reaching a sustainable political solution guided by the will and needs of the people. We have a senior personnel announcement. Today, the Secretary General is appointing Katrina Lang of the United Kingdom as his new special representative for Somalia and head of the UN Assistance Mission in Somalia, UNSOM. She will join James Swan of the United States of America. She will succeed James Swan of the United States of America, to whom the Secretary General is grateful for his dedication and steadfast leadership of UNSOM during his tenure. Ms. Lang brings to this position over 35 years of experience in diplomacy, development, and international relations, including having held United Kingdom government policy roles in various departments at the national and international levels. Most recently, from November 2018 until April 2023, she served as British High Commissioner to Nigeria. More online. Today is World Press Freedom Day. In his message, the Secretary General says that this day highlights a basic truth, which is that all our freedom depends on press freedom. Freedom of the press, he adds, is the foundation of democracy and justice, but in every corner of the world, it's under attack. As a reminder, 10 years ago, the United Nations established a plan of action on the safety of journalists to protect media workers and end impunity for crimes committed against them. And we have 3 more welcome payments to the regular budget report. These come from Japan, Tonga, and the United Arab Emirates, and their payments take us to 102 fully paid up nations. And last, before we turn to Toby Harward, tomorrow our guest will be the Executive Director of the Stop TB Partnership, Dr. Lucicia Dittio, who will be here to brief you on the global impact of tuberculosis, particularly in conflict areas. Okay, great. And before we turn to our previously scheduled guests, Arif Hussein and Maximo Torero, I'll take any questions you have for me. Yes, Betul first.
Farhan, thank you. You talked about Yemen, and just a quick question on that. When does the UN plan to offload the Zafar oil tanker? Since the purchase of the vessel has been completed, and I believe it went to China and it came back. And do you plan to do that in May? Any specific date? Thanks.
Yeah. Well, what I can tell you on that, tomorrow, Thursday, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands are going to be holding a pledging event for the FSO Zafar. So we hope that will attract all of the necessary funds for the completion of this project. At this stage, the tanker that will take on the oil, the ship that we told you about, the Nautica, is to arrive in the region in the coming days, and we believe that this operation will start before the end of this month. Yes, please.
Just a quick question. I don't know if you have a comment on this or not, but this morning, the Kremlin, and I mean, the Russia reported that the Kremlin was attacked by 2 drones. The U.S. has not said they cannot confirm this. Do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, on that, what I can say is we've seen these reports, and we're also aware of the statements that were made in this regard by the Russian and Ukrainian authorities. The UN is not in a position to confirm these reports. We strongly reiterate our call on all concerned to refrain from any rhetoric or action that could further escalate the conflict. Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. Just wanted to clarify a couple of things. First, the 17,000 tons that's been looted, is that across all of Sudan? How much of it is in Darfur? And secondly, is Mr. Griffiths staying in Port Sudan, or is he going to Nairobi to the Chief Executive Board meeting? And thirdly, do you know anything about contacts between anybody in the UN and the two generals?
Well, for your first question, the World Food Program reported about 17,000 metric tons having been looted out. And this is out of the stock of more than 80,000 metric tons of food that the agency had in Sudan already, in different parts of the country. So the looting occurred in many different areas. You would probably be able to get more details from the World Food Program itself about where the specific looting occurred, but they are right now in the process of trying to evaluate the stocks that were lost. Right now, Martin Griffiths is in Port Sudan. He, in fact, spoke to the press earlier today. I believe some of you even joined if you were up early in the morning to hear from him. So he'll be there for some days. I don't know at this stage whether he'll be able to go to the Chief Executive's Board meeting, which is starting basically tomorrow. But we'll see whether he can go to that. As for the political talks on Sudan, as you know, our special envoy Volker has been working on this issue, and he is in close contact alongside his partners in the trilateral mechanism as well as key member states in having exchanges with the parties. Mr. Perth's goal is an immediate halt to the violence with the view to reaching agreements on a durable cessation of hostilities. And of course, what we're doing is coordinating our efforts with those of the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and other key regional member states. And close coordination of our efforts is essential. So Mr. Perth is also engaging with the conflict parties on the facilitation of humanitarian access and the provision of assistance, and he's doing that alongside Martin Griffiths, of course, who's now arrived there. So that's what I can say about the various diplomatic efforts. I don't have any particular breakthroughs or announcements to share with you. Pam.
Thanks, Farhan. A little follow-up to the question on the drones and the Kremlin this morning. You made a statement, but does the UN see this, whoever is behind operating the drones, as escalatory and maybe the pretext or reason for countermeasures? Thank you.
Well, I think you heard what I said, and I'd repeat it, that we want everyone to refrain either from rhetoric or from action that could further escalate the conflict. Alan?
Oh, thank you, Pam. Just asked my question, so I'm fine.
Well, that's great news for me. Kristen?
Thanks, Farhan. Our guest mentioned the need for much more international support and funding for Sudan. Is there an appeal out or coming, or is there a number? I'm sorry if this has been out and I've missed it, but do we have a number yet?
Right now, we're still at the stage of evaluating the needs. As you know, for 2 weeks, we were essentially flying blind because we were not able to really go out around and determine what the needs are. So we're trying to determine those, and at that point, we can come up with a more extensive appeal. Yvonne.
Thanks, Farhan. We heard about the UN international staff who've been evacuated from Sudan, but what about the national staff working for the UN? How many of them want to leave, and are they able to?
Well, we as a general rule, we try to maintain national staff in places where they can be safe. So what we're trying to do is relocate them to areas where they would be safest. We haven't been moving them outside of their own country. Stefano.
Thank you, Farhan. It's about the meeting that the Secretary General organized in Doha. I have a question on the countries that participated. Those countries were practically came there because the Secretary General organized this, that they were all invited potentially, or the Secretary General invited certain countries and didn't invited other countries.
We gave the list of countries.
I know.
Basically, the idea is we organized it among countries that had envoys dealing specifically with Afghanistan, and this was a convening of all of the various envoys.
So you mean that the country that were not there is because they don't have a specific envoy or don't?
As with every meeting, an invitation list is made up, and we organize that. But in this case, the focus was on making sure that the countries who have international envoys dealing with Afghanistan are there to coordinate their efforts. Okay, before we turn to you, let's go to the screens. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Farhan. I'm sure you have seen the Taliban response to the Doha meeting on Afghanistan. They have criticized their exclusion and for not giving them an opportunity to hear their side of the story. Any comments on that?
We're aware of the views of the de facto authorities of the Taliban. The point of this conference was to coordinate international efforts in terms of how to deal with the situation in Afghanistan, including how to deal with the Taliban. And so that was what the meeting was about, and I would just refer you to what the Secretary General said at the close of the meeting. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Farhan. Following the death of the Palestinian detainee Khadr Adnan, clashes erupted between the resistance movement in Gaza and Israeli occupation forces. However, it was contained, and I think Thor Winsland spoke about it. So could you tell us more about the efforts to contain the clashes? And the second, related also to the same thing, Israel so far did not release the body of Khadr Adnan. So do you have any comment on that?
On the efforts to contain it, what I can tell you is that Tor Venesland has welcomed the restoration of calm in Gaza and Israel following nearly 12 hours of hostilities, and he thanked local and regional partners for their engagement. He warned that had our efforts failed, we would risk being in the midst of another deadly escalation. He will continue to engage actively with all concerned parties, including the Palestinian Authority, to avoid any loss of life and reverse negative trends on the ground. As for the release of the body, we hope that the involved parties will be able to discuss with each other and get this matter resolved as soon as possible. Betul.
Farhan, thanks. On Myanmar, there were reports that the Myanmar army released more than 2,000 people from prison this morning, and you just shared this statement with us on the Special Envoy's visit to China. I'm just curious if the Special Envoy has been working on this issue for some time, and also does this trip of hers has anything to do since China has influence over Myanmar?
I don't have anything to say about any connections. What I can tell you on our side is that the Secretary General is encouraged by the announcement of the amnesty releases of detainees in Myanmar. He reiterates his call for the immediate release of all of those who continue to be arbitrarily detained, including President Win Myint and State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. And he remains deeply concerned about the ongoing violence in Myanmar, including the continued indiscriminate attacks against civilians and arbitrary detentions by the Myanmar armed forces.